everyone, I'm Alexa, a licensed therapist who talks about addictions most people don't even know exist. When you think of the word addiction, what comes to mind? For most people, it's either drugs or alcohol, but addiction comes in many forms, and one that's rarely talked about is love addiction. Now, here's the shocking part. In the DSM, the manual that therapists use to diagnose mental health disorders, caffeine addiction gets a mention, but love addiction, not at all. And yet, people can and do lose relationships with family and friends, health, and their sense of self because of it. So maybe it's not mentioned because there's not that many people that experience it. Kesha captured love addiction well in her song fittingly titled Your Love Is My Drug. It currently has 135 million views on YouTube and nearly 350 million plays on Spotify. Now, there's a reason this song is a hit because it resonates. People know what it's like to feel addicted to love. And yet, most people suffer on their own because it's rarely named or understood. So, you might be thinking, if it's not identified, then what's with the rise of love addiction? The title of this video. Recently, Oprah spoke with New York Times bestselling author Elizabeth Gilbert, who openly identified as being a love addict. She also noted that few women would publicly admit this, which I believe is largely because there's so much shame and stigma around it. There's little research, and as I mentioned, no formal recognition, which leaves most people feeling isolated. But just because the science isn't there doesn't mean the suffering isn't real. I predict that with less stigma, more education, and real support, the impact of love addiction will be undeniable and we'll see an increase in people identifying as love addicts. The more that we talk about it, the more healing becomes possible, which is why this is something that's so important to me. So, let's dig into what does love addiction look like? How do we know that we might be experiencing it, and what are the signs? Let's first go into what does it look like. Here are a couple of real life scenarios. The first one might be prioritizing romantic interest or relationship above work, school, friends, family, despite there being negative consequences. The next might be choosing partners with red flags like unavailability. Maybe they're working all the time or they're already in a relationship, but regardless, trying to win their love. And another example might be looking for the perfect partner, bouncing from relationship to relationship, and struggling to build something long term when you really do want a long term relationship. After a while, these patterns start to take a toll. And someone with love addiction might notice strained ties with family and friends, neglected self care, depression, anxiety, paranoia, loneliness, hopelessness, and maybe shame from doing something that conflicts with their values. They might even notice their work or finances suffer. So, I want to get into the signs of how we know that we're in addictive territory, but before I do that, I want to address sex addiction because historically, love and sex addiction have been coupled together and they can occur at the same time. Love addiction happens in the context of relationships, whether short or long term, and usually relationships include sex. But just because sex and love are happening in the same context doesn't mean that they're the same. Here's where it gets a little tricky. A common belief that love addicts have is that sex equals love. What we have to ask ourselves is what is the object? Love or sex? In this case, the belief sex equals love falls under love addiction because the object is love. Someone with sex addiction wouldn't be concerned with the romantic nature of the relationship. They would just be concerned with fulfilling their sexual desires. So, as you can see, these are two distinct addictions, and for this video, I will just be talking about love addiction. Okay, so let's get back to it. What are the signs of love addiction? I'm turning to the research of Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's done a lot of work in the field of addiction and outlines 4 core signs. I'll give a little bit of context to and how this relates to love addiction. So, the first is obsession, which is an intense, abnormal preoccupation with someone or something. So, someone with love addiction will be consumed with thinking about that person, replaying interactions, fantasizing about the relationship with that person, planning the next time to spend together, and directly engaging with that person. The second is compulsion, which is feeling driven to contact or be with that person, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't. The third is continuing despite negative consequences. Maybe you're losing sleep, your work is suffering, your friends are starting to get worried. You notice that it's taking a toll, but yet you can't stop. And then the last and fourth sign is tolerance. So, just like substances, our brains get used to the neurochemicals that the behavior or substance is producing, which requires increased or escalated behavior. This means more time, more intensity to feel the same way you did in the beginning. So, for love addiction, this might look like moving in together, right? More time, more intensity. So, those are the four core signs, but we can actually dig a little bit deeper and look at some traits that come with addiction. The first trait is it's unmanageable. One of the most common treatments for addiction is a 12 steps recovery program. And the first out of the 12 steps reads, we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction and that our lives had become unmanageable. The second is that it's progressive and degenerative, which means that it tends to get worse without help and quality of life deteriorates over time. The next is that it's used as an escape for difficult emotions. So, for someone with love addiction, this might look like messing up at work and feelings of shame, guilt, maybe worry. And to escape those feelings, maybe you fantasize about a romantic trip to Italy with a partner. The next is that it acts as a reward system. And lastly, it creates a feeling of power. So, in one of the scenarios I mentioned, winning someone's love, right? And after repeated efforts of trying to do that, even if someone reciprocates for a moment, it can give that feeling of winning and then also that feeling of power. So, those are the traits and the symptoms, but how can we explore a little bit further if this is something that we are experiencing? There's a couple of questions that I want to provide that you can reflect on. The first question is, do you feel empty when you are alone or after having just left a partner? The second is, do you often neglect family, friends, work, school, hobbies because you're so preoccupied with a partner? The third is, have you ever felt shame or fear as a result of pursuing romantic activities? And lastly, have you ever tried to control relationships but keep finding that you can't? If any of these resonate, know that you are not alone. I'm going to leave a longer self-assessment in the description. This video is really just a snapshot of love addiction, but there can be other nuances. So I encourage you to go explore that out if there's any curiosity. And if you're thinking to yourself, yes, this is me, this is something that I want to address, then I recommend trying out a 12 steps program for love addiction or finding a therapist that specializes in love addiction. So that is the foundation of what love addiction is, what it looks like, how you know that you might be experiencing it. In part two, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into why love even becomes addictive, from brain chemistry to childhood attachment wounds, and most importantly, how healing happens. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe so that more people can name and understand love addiction. And please leave a comment if this is something that's resonating with you, or if you have experienced love addiction. I'd love to know what's been helpful in your recovery process. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.